for the rejection of the offering. And tonight we'll look at the response on part of Cain to the rejection, and then the results that come after the response. So here we have two that they've grown up in the same home. They've been exposed to the same message. Obviously, they've been taught about the Creator because they're bringing their offerings to Him. Okay? But they take two very different paths in life. And we know that sometimes to be the case, right? To the dismay of parents. You can have a child that's brought up in the right setting with the right teaching, the right instruction, but they choose the wrong path. And sometimes that happens because ultimately it's their decision to make. And that's very hard. And over the years I've talked with parents who were concerned either about the child at home, a young child, or an older child, a child that was grown and moved away and hadn't made the right decisions concerning their relationship to God, hadn't made the right decisions about life, and it was just very frustrating and disheartening to the parent. And if the parent could, they would die, literally die, to change it. But that doesn't work either. Ultimately, it's their decision to make. Now, sometimes it's the result of just bad parenting, and sometimes we look at situations and we see a child come into adulthood and take the path that they take, and we look at it and we think, well, no wonder. I mean, look at what they were exposed to, and look at the instruction that they received and the example that they received. But sometimes it's just the opposite. Could be a very godly home, a God-honoring home, but for whatever reason, along the way they decide to depart. I want more than anything else for both of my children to love the Lord and to find spouses one day that are the same. But ultimately, I can't make their decision, and when they leave my home, I'm not going to be able to make their decision about their spouse either. So it can be very frustrating. But here we have an example of one taking the right road and one taking the wrong road. And so Cain gives his offering and it's rejected. Abel gives his and God respects. The Bible says God respects Abel and his offering, but not Cain and his. So let's look at what happens next. Not only does Cain, and we're going to look at his response to it. Not only does Cain have a problem with God, and that's why God rejects the offering. Remember I shared with you from Hebrews where it says, by faith Abel gave his. Indication is Cain wasn't coming the same way. All right? So not only does Cain have a problem with God and have a problem with his worship, Cain also has a problem with others. And those two usually go hand in hand, right? If you got a problem this way, you tend to have a problem this way. You can't get along with others, that's a reflection that you don't have a right relationship with God. In fact, Jesus expressed it this way, didn't he? He said to his disciples, by this the world will know that you belong to me, your love for one another, right? How you love one another, how you treat one another. The world will know that you're my follower, you belong to me. And so Cain has a problem with others. In this case, he has a problem with his brother. Now, we skip over this important part in chapter 6. Let's look at it again. Before we get to him killing his brother, the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? Now, we skip over the first part of verse 6. The Lord said to Cain. The Lord is speaking to Cain. You see that? Now, God has chosen to commune and interact with man in different ways at different points in history. Okay? Why? Well, He's God. He chooses to do what He chooses to do. In the Old Testament, most of the Old Testament, God chose to interact with man through the law, through the sacrificial system. Okay? But prior to that, there were times when God came and talked with man. I mean, face to face, talked with man. An example of that would be with Abraham. He and God are talking about what's happening over in Sodom, right? And Abraham doesn't want him to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah because why? That's what?
Lot's over there.
Yeah, Lot's over there. That's one of our big events too when we go through Genesis. Destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And so he's communicating with God in a way that's very different for most of the people following God throughout the Old Testament. There were prophets who had that direct experience with God. Another one from Genesis would be Jacob. Right before he meets Esau, he's in his tent, and he's all worried about meeting Esau because he's afraid Esau's going to kill him. Because that's what he said he was going to do. And so that night, he does, what happens to him?
He wrestles with God.
He wrestles with God. Yeah. God says, you better let me go before the sun comes up. And he says, I won't let you go till you bless me. In other words, I won't let you go till I know you're going to take care of this situation. Everything's going to be good with me, right? And so he wrestles with God and lives, and then the next day goes out to meet Esau, his brother, and everything indeed is taken care of. And so God has chosen to interact with man at various ways at different points in history. You look at the book of Acts. God revealed Himself in certain ways in the book of Acts. They may not do today. There are a lot of wonders and signs and things, certain things that happened in the book of Acts that were to give credibility to the message that the apostles were giving to the people. Okay? That was very important for those things to happen at that time. And so here, God is directly communicating with Cain. Tells you a little bit of the status, the importance of Cain in God's eyes. He's here talking to him. Now, as I said this morning, reading the Old Testament, Cain just killed his brother, Abel, who had been worshiping God. God had respected him and his offering, He had just killed Abel. Abel, you would think God would just snap his head off right now. Right? You look at the Old Testament law. You would think God would just, boom, He's gone. Look at Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay? You would think He's done. God took people's life for far less than this in the Old Testament. I mean, you look at the New Testament, same thing. Ananias and Sapphira. Pretending to do something they had not. Lying. They were lying. And they both fell dead. Boom. Here Cain has murdered Abel. And God doesn't just wipe him out. The Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? And why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And that's what Cain is fussing about here. He accepted Abel's offering. He didn't accept mine. You just see him pouting over there, mumbling. The good Baptist. And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door. I like that. Now, tell me what your translation says, because it's probably different.
Sin is crouching at
I like that better. It's probably KJV, right?
New International.
New International Version. Sin is crouching. Who has KJV? What does it say? Anybody
King
have?
James Version says, and if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door.
Sin lieth at the door. Okay. I knew somebody had to have King. This is a Baptist church. Ain't nobody got a King James Version? All right. So sin, I like that vision of that picture. Sin crouching at the door. Okay. Kind of reminds you of how Satan is described, right? Sneaking around, seeking whom he may devour. And its desire is for you, but you should rule over it. In other words, you should have some self-control. Self-control. Sometimes people, in justifying their actions to me, will say, "You don't understand, I just have a bad temper. I just have a problem with my temper." Now really what you should be saying is you have a problem with self-control. And when you tell people that, now they don't like that, because they don't mind describing themselves as having a bad temper. That is, when I get into certain situations, I do things that I shouldn't do because of the pressure being exerted on me by forces outside of me. I get into certain situations, people make me angry, and so I just do whatever comes into my mind at the time. I say whatever comes into my mind, I do whatever comes into my mind. Well, hey, look, your problem then is you don't have self-control. You don't have self-control. And we almost say that like we're bragging sometimes. That's nothing to brag about. Oh, bad temper just runs in my family. That's nothing to brag about. That's something to be ashamed of. That means you lack self-control. By the way, isn't that one evidence of the Spirit controlling our life? Is that we have self-control. Self-control. You should rule over it. You should have self-control. So Cain talks with Abel, his brother. It comes to pass they're out in the field. He rises up against him, and he kills him. James chapter 3, verse 16 says, "For where envy and selfish ambition exist, there is disorder and every kind of evil." Let me read that one more time, because that applies here now. For where envy and selfish ambition exist, there is disorder and every kind of evil. Now, what had Abel done to him? Abel had not done anything to him. Well, there's no indication that Abel had done anything to him or even said anything to him about it. But you see, when things are not going well with us, we can't stand when they're going well with someone else. It just bothers us to no end. And we see this in our society today. We see it in reality TV. We see it at the grocery store. You got all those magazines right there where you check out. It's got all the celebrities on there. It's not telling you anything good about those. Of course, we know those are very unreliable sources of information, right? For those of you who read them. Okay? Read those in the Soap Opera Digest. For those of you that read that, those are not the most reliable sources of information that are out there. But those magazines sell because they're taking those who are considered to be successful and famous and showing how their lives are messed up. And look, there's a huge market for that out there. Huge market. Just like with reality TV. There's a huge audience out there, folks. They just, they like this. Well, look at there. Look what's happening there. By the way, that's what drives gossip. That's what drives gossip. It's not concern for people. Oh, did you hear about so-and-so? Blah, 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 blah. They're getting a divorce. Their children, done this or that. Or they got locked up or, whatever. We say that, we spread that kind of stuff because it makes us feel better about our situation. Think we got something up on them. We don't like to hear that everything's rosy and wonderful for them. And all this is jealousy. That's all it is. Man's nature hasn't changed. As we go through Genesis, you're going to see in these folks' life, this is the ancient world, by the way. Okay? Very different as far as technology is concerned with our world. Radically different. But the nature's still the same. Still the same. We get to Joseph, for example. Potiphar's wife. Man hasn't and woman hasn't changed. Okay? All right. And so he's jealous. He's jealous. And James says where envy and selfish ambition exist, there's disorder in every kind of evil. That's James 3:16 if you need to make a note of that. And so here comes jealousy, and he gives the devil his opportunity. Ephesians chapter 4 verse 27 says, "Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, and don't give the devil an opportunity." And that's what he does right here. He gives the devil an opportunity. He rises up and he murders his brother. So that's his response to the rejection. Murder. murder. Now, let's look at the result of his response. The Lord said to Cain, "Where's Abel, your brother?" That sounds familiar, right? Because back in Genesis chapter 3, God comes in the garden and says, "Where are you?" You know? Now, you know, he knew where Adam and Eve was. He knew what had happened here, but he wants Cain to think about it. "Where's Abel, your brother?" Cain said, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" Now, can you imagine responding to God like this? I told you, he's got a problem with God. And that's going to mess up every other aspect of his life. I mean, if you're not right with God, everything else is going to be messed up. Nothing's going to work out for you. You've got to have that relationship firm. That's got to be right. Then everything else will fall into place. Am I my brother's keeper? The answer to that is absolutely you are. I am. I mean, that's a basic New Testament teaching, that we are to watch out over our brother. And not just our physical brother, our spiritual brother as well. Am I my brother's keeper?
He lied
God-
when he says that, I know not.
Right.
So he just lied right there.
And he said, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. So now you are cursed from the earth, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you till the ground, it shall no longer yield its strength to you. A fugitive and a vagabond, you shall be on the earth." Now, this is where it gets interesting. Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is greater than I can bear. Surely you have driven me out this day from the face of the ground. I shall be hidden from your face. I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond on the earth. And it will happen that anyone who finds me will kill me." In other words, I'm ruined as a result. Now, the anyone that would find him, I submit to you, would be a near relative of his. And the Lord said to him, "Therefore, whoever kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold." Now, instead of just wiping Cain out, God is now making provision for him that he will be cared for. And declaring that anyone that touches him is going to be in trouble. And the Lord set a mark on Cain. What was the mark? You tell me. We don't know what the mark was. But he set some identification on Cain, lest anyone finding him should kill him. What mercy he shows to Cain, who has done this hideous thing. And yet that's not the greatest example of that, is it? What mercy God showed to mankind after they crucified his son. I mean, we look at this and we go, boy, I don't quite understand that. Why would God do that? Well, you look at the cross and what God does after that in bringing salvation to man. Look at the Apostle Paul, for example, murderer of Christians. Why didn't God just snap him out of here? Nope. He has an encounter with the risen Christ, and God turns his life around. And then one day takes him to glory. Mercy and grace. And we're going to see that. We start off with the creation of man, then we go to the fall of man, and then the depravity of man. And then here and over at the flood, we're going to see the mercy of God. Why is he merciful here and not merciful in other times? I do not know. But just to say that he is. Why didn't he just wipe out Sodom and Gomorrah? A bunch of pagans. Why didn't he just wipe them out? Well, he does wipe them out. He takes Lot out of there. Well, Lot shouldn't have been there to begin with. But he has mercy on him and his family. Well, his wife doesn't turn out too good for him. Then Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod. Now, where's Nod? East of Eden. And Cain knew his wife. That's all we know. It tells us here, all that we know, east of Eden. So if you find Eden, you go north, take a right, Nod will be right side. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. And he built a city, and called the name of that city after the name of his son, Enoch. And then we get the story of Cain and his descendants there. So here comes the question that unbelievers and believers, but unbelievers use it to poke holes in the authority of the Bible. Here comes the natural question. Well, where did Cain then get his wife? Well, biblically, you have two options. And I suppose there could be others. You always say there's two options. There's some nuts got another one out there. But really, there are two routes you can take. One is to say that Adam and Eve are not, Adam and Eve, but Eve is described in Genesis chapter 3 as the mother of all living. Okay? One option would be to say that that's not the case. And there was another group of people that God created, and they're inhabiting the earth at this time, and therefore Cain chooses a wife from that group. There are, of course, major problems with that. In Genesis chapter 3, verse 20, Eve is described as the mother of all living. Back in chapter 2, after God tells Adam, you got to populate the earth, all the animals are brought to him, and there's not a suitable mate found for him. And so then woman, Eve, is created. And so if there was another group of people, why wasn't one of those chosen? Why did God have to take his rib? We're one rib short. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 45. Let me back up. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 21 and 22 and 45, along with some other passages like Acts chapter 17, verse 26, tell us in the New Testament that Adam, all of man, can be traced back to Adam. In fact, Jesus' lineage is traced back to Adam as well. So you have major biblical problems if you try to take that route. And you say that there are some folks in the world that they don't go back to Adam and Eve, they go back to another group. I know that would be convenient to say. They're not one of us. They go back in a different direction, but you don't have any biblical backing for that kind of idea. That's the pre-Adamic race that I talked to you about before. And I had a deacon in one church that I was in that was his stance. He was fully confident in that, but of course couldn't address the verses that I just shared with you that make it quite clear that we all go back. There's one race, and you may not like that idea, but you're going to have to, if you're going to talk to me about it, you're going to have to use your Bible. Or you better have some good evidence outside of that. I submit to you there's one race. We all go back to Adam. Adam sinned, we all fail. Therefore, all people need Jesus. They need someone to be the sacrifice for their sin. That's of course, the other view. And then if you take that, then where did Cain get his wife? Well, it would have to be a descendant of Adam and Eve. Adam lived, according to Genesis chapter 5, that's where you get into the genealogies. And I know you love those, right? You love the genealogies. Here's one good thing that you see from the genealogies, and that God pays attention to people's names. Okay? God pays attention to names. God knows our name. Genesis chapter 5 is where you have that genealogy that we often go to because it tells us about Enoch. Now, not the Enoch I just read about, but a different Enoch who walked with God, and the Bible says what happened to him. He was just taken up, right? He's just walking with God, and he just walked right on out of here, So a lot of times we'll go to that genealogy for that, or for the oldest guy, Methuselah, right? But in that genealogy, it tells us that Adam lived, will you tell me, this is in verse 3, Adam lived, wait a minute, it's verse 5. Verse 3 is when he has Seth. 930 years. After 130 years, he has Seth. He and Eve have Seth. Seth comes after Cain and Abel. Okay? And so he lives 130 years and has Seth, lives 930 years total. The Bible says he has sons and daughters and doesn't tell us the names of those. We do know this, that Adam was told, along with Eve, that you have to populate the earth. Okay? And so we have a period of time here where that's taking place. How many children came out of that? You will have to ask Adam and Eve that one day. I do not know how many children came out of that. But I do know biblically from the Genesis account that that's how the earth was populated. Okay? So that means that, and we have this in Genesis. You have to have this. If you go back to one couple, Adam and Eve, that means that there was marrying going on close within the family. There's no other way for that to occur. Okay? And so from there it branches out, and the earth is populated. So those are the only two options that I know of, looking at the Bible. The first one really not being an option, I don't think. Yes?
I got a question, maybe you can. My Bible's got descendants of Cain, then it's got descendants of Adam, and you don't see Cain in there.
Where are you at?
Adam's genealogy here.
Where are you at?
And in chapter 4, starting with 16, that's where mine says descendants of Cain.
Yeah, Adam is in chapter 5, beginning in verse 1.
But you don't see Cain's name in that, though, do you? Well, his genealogy of Adam.
No,
Okay.
no, or Abel, for that matter.
Yeah.
Starts
Even
with
Abel's not in there because he don't have no children.
starts with Seth.
Yeah.
Well, that's probably the idea, is
Right.
that, And then, by the way, I didn't point this out, but notice how many times, just the hideous nature of this sin, I think Moses is trying to make this abundantly clear. If you look in chapter 4, the number of times the word brother is used. Over and over again, the word brother is used. And I think Moses is trying to show just the terrible act here that Cain is guilty of. Okay? And then it gets worse. It gets worse. So we're going to move into Noah. All right? And what I would like to do is compare the two. So I want you to think along these lines. The person of Cain and the person of Noah. During Noah's day, the world is just wicked altogether. And God grieves over the fact that He has created the world. Okay? And so along comes Noah. And I want you to note the difference between the two. Okay? And we'll spend a little time on Noah, because then we get into the ark and the various features of the ark and that kind of thing. All right. Any other questions?
How old did Cain live?
I don't think it says.
I get confused with all stuff because I don't know who's living at the same time.
Well, okay, that's another issue. I'm glad you brought that up. When you read verses 16 through 24, you have a whole lot of stuff going on. You obviously have a time period that goes over verses 25 and 26, where Seth is born. Because Seth is born when Adam's 130 years old. Okay? So, it couldn't have been more than 130 years. Obviously, it would have been less than that, because you got Cain and Abel. All right? They're big enough to be herding a flock and tilling the ground. So, it's no more than 130 years, but then verses 16 through 24, you got a lot of time, obviously, that covers. Okay? So we don't know how much time it was before Cain got his wife. It could have been much longer. It could have happened much farther on down the road than, right after him killing his brother. We don't know. Okay.
I would just like to comment that if, what it says, Cain, was the father of Enoch, and Enoch was so close to God, something good came out of God, letting Cain live.
It's a different Enoch.
Oh, it's a different issue?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I'm sorry. My comment went right.
I want to say something, please.
Yes, ma'am.
The last 2 weeks, I guess has been the black cloud hanging over Minnie Carroll. A lot of y'all know that we have a 27-year-old granddaughter in service. her husband's in service, and he's, got his shots to go overseas. She's just really found out that she has cancer, and she's going to have surgery the 30th.
What's her name?
Nicole Davis, everybody knows her.
All right. Well, let's have a word of prayer, and this is going to close